bringing you in-depth discussion from one of the most read group of online writers covering the Edmonton Oilers. Are you ready for Oilers Overtime? Join us as we talk news, rumors, trades, player grades, game results, and more, all featured on one of the most glorified teams in the NHL, from the great one to the next one, from the boys on the bus to the decade of darkness. This is Oilers Overtime.
Hey there, everybody. Welcome to another edition of Oilers Overtime, perhaps the most depressing edition of Oilers Overtime that we're going to be doing in quite a while. We've got everybody here with us again. Our regular panel's back. Julian Mongillo is over there. Julian, how are you?
I'm doing good. I'm taking one for the team. Just missing the tail end of the Leafs game here. They're up 3-0 when I left, so hopefully they can ride that one out. But I'll extend the invitation for you guys to jump on the bandwagon while it's still hot.
You don't need to
have a lot to dissect.
You don't need to keep watching. We all know that a 3-goal lead is totally safe in the playoffs.
Oh yeah,
right?
yeah, for sure.
Yeah, Oilers fans know that well. 3-goal leads, they're no problem. No big deal. All you need is 3 minutes. Colton Pankiw's with us. Colton, how are you?
I'll probably be cheering for any team that's playing against the Leafs, so I won't hop on that bandwagon with you. But besides the series, I guess I'm okay.
Yeah, and funny things, I'll probably be cheering for Winnipeg now because I'll feel better if the team that beat the Edmonton Oilers goes on to win the Stanley Cup. Wouldn't that feel just a little bit better? Okay, well, at least we lost to the Stanley Cup champions. You know what I mean? Brian Swane's with us as well. Brian, how are you?
I've never bought into that philosophy of cheering for the team that just took you out. I've never been with that. It's always been, if that was the thought, we would have been cheering for Dallas way back in the day. And that's something I could never even begin to wrap my head around. So I don't know. I might, you know what, Julian, I might be coming on that Leafs bandwagon.
There's lots of room.
Isn't everybody on the bandwagon at least one point in their life? Isn't that why Toronto has so many army soldiers everywhere?
It's just a matter of who admits it.
That's true.
I suppose that's true. I did live in Texas for a while, and I never cheered for the Dallas Stars, so I don't know what that tells you. But yeah, we're going to start off with the series. For those of you that are watching, this is Oilers Overtime. We do this every week on YouTube, Facebook. We hope that you like the show. We'd appreciate it if you give us a thumbs up, like and subscribe on YouTube, hit the notification button for any future videos. But we're going to get into the real garbagey stuff right now. We're going to talk about the series. The Oilers lose 4 straight. And Brian, I'm blaming you because last week you said by the time we go around, this series could be over. You said that, and it's your fault.
Off air, though. I did say that off air. So you see, you can't hold that against me.
I suppose
that doesn't
That's
exist
true,
in this narrative.
And I also do understand that you probably meant that the Oilers were going to be the winners in 4, but none of us assumed that this is what we'd be dealing with right now. Colton, I'll start with you. I think you weren't on with us last week, I don't think, were you? So you didn't get the chance to predict what the series would be, but most of us at 5 or 6 or whatever. What do you make of the fact that this is over now?
It was 2 weeks ago I had missed, so I was in on that too. I think I think I had said 6. And honestly, I was kind of being just generous, if anything. I thought, if anything, they might make it shorter than that too. So yeah, I can't believe we're doing this. When Brian said it could be done, I thought maybe it could be too, obviously with an Oilers win. So it's just shocking, really. And I think one of the most frustrating parts is obviously last night and just after a few of the losses, you're pretty disappointed. But when you kind of look back at it, I don't think they played that bad. 3 games went to overtime, and then I think the Jets' depth kind of won it over a bit. But I don't think they were as bad as what it looks like when you hear they got swept.
Yeah, if you look at the numbers of this series, and I think Jason Greger from TSN put out a really good article today, just talking about all the different advanced stats, not necessarily advanced stats, but all the different categories that the Oilers led in. They outplayed the Jets for the most part, but it was moments. It was 3 minutes, like we talked about at the opening of the show, that they did them in game 3, and it was the inability to clear a puck in game 4. It was just these small little moments. Julian, if you had to pick one word to describe how this series would go, whether it's collapse or, whatever, what is there a word that you could say that would actively describe what happened to the Oilers in this series?
I'll say that's hockey. I'll give you 2 because I don't know which one would best sum it up, but that's hockey for you. it could go either way. When playoffs start, anything can happen, and everybody knows that. Every game's a new game, like I said last week, and it wasn't that it came down to goaltending, because Mike Smith, honestly, that game could have been over several times if Mike Smith didn't come up big in some situations. So, I mean, it wasn't a matter of the goaltending aside from that collapse in game 3 it was, but that's hard to just blame on one person, because that's a collective effort there for 3 goals in 3 minutes. But I mean, it's a tough pill to swallow, but I think it's just a fashion at which it happened, and that's the most shocking thing to everybody. But I mean, I think that the Jets just gained momentum off that first win, and it just felt like to me that the Oilers were just playing catch up and on their heels after that game. It just seemed like every move they made wasn't in their best interest. It was to counteract something that the opposing team was doing. It was almost like they were always chasing the game and being reactive instead of proactive, and sticking to their style of hockey and doing what they thought was best for their group.
Yeah, that's a good point. It was not the same type of hockey that we watched during the regular season. Obviously, playoff hockey is different than regular season hockey, but this was not the same 2 teams that went up against each other as we witnessed in the regular season. Brian, if you could pick, and it's probably hard to do so when you look at this and you go, okay, there's 4 games here where you could argue the Oilers outplayed the Jets in 4 games. Is there a turning point in this series? Was there a moment when it looked like, oh man, this is not going, like, can we say that all the way to the beginning of the very first faceoff when Edmonton came out and didn't play the same style of hockey? Or was there a moment in this series where you're like, yeah, this is probably it for them?
I think the turning point would have to be probably the brief period, that the 3 minutes and 3 seconds when they gassed the 4-1 lead, because really they played so well in that game. They did everything you wanted to do. They regrouped. They came out. We're playing a terrific game on the road. We're playing with a lot of poise, a lot of self-confidence. It looked like a team that had found themselves. They'd finally been able to solve Hellebuck. And if they hang on and win that game, and they were, not only just win it, but win it in a fairly dominating fashion, they've got their confidence back. They got their mojo back. They're back in the series. We could be 2-2 right now. So I'm going to look at that because I think until that point, that's when the series ended. I think, you could say maybe the turning point was in game 1, maybe it was in game 2, but to me, it was in game 3 when they were right there about to pull back in this series. And I genuinely feel that they would have had such momentum that this could have gone a completely different direction. Instead the rest is history, right?
Yeah, well, they were certainly confident after game 1. Like you listen to Leon Draisaitl, and he's like, yeah, we're not worried. Like, yeah, we didn't score. Leon and Conor didn't get on the board, but we're not worried. You can tell after the game 1, it's like, yeah, we'll be fine. Then after game 2, when they didn't score again, and you're kind of like, okay, Winnipeg has figured something out here. Now, you may never contain these guys forever, but they figured out a way to sort of clog it up and contain them a little bit. And then they break out in game 3. Leon and Conor get 3 each. And you're like, okay, all right, now here we go. Here's what's happened with the Oilers. This is what we're expecting to see. And then just the worst 3 minutes you could possibly imagine. And that was it. And then I think once you're down 3-0, I mean, who realistically, in the back of your mind, you're going, well, we got a shot. It's been done before. It's pretty rare. We can do it. If there's anybody in this room, maybe we can do it. But you have to know at that point it's kind of over. Now I'm thinking, so you get into that triple overtime, there's a real turning point for you. If you have an ability to come back from a 3-0 deficit, you could do it. But of course, like it was all the way through the series. Whenever the Oilers needed a big goal, a big moment to stop something, they just couldn't do it. And Winnipeg could. How much credit, Colton, do you think we should give to the Jets here? Because we're talking about the Oilers and maybe being better than the Jets overall in the series and really deserving a better outcome. But I mean, the Jets won. They played solid hockey. How much credit do we got to give to them?
I mean, I think a ton. I don't think anybody would have ever imagined that they would that they'd sweep the Oilers. I think it just really showed like Connor Hellebuck was incredible. I mean, there's a reason he won the Vezina Trophy last year. And then again, I think just like the Jets forwards, I think we had said on this podcast before that they might have been one of the most underrated teams in the league this year. They didn't really get talked about a ton in the North Division. And I think their blue line at times was kind of the reason why people question that. But like Josh Morrissey was incredible all series. And then, yeah, just their forward depth, I thought he just kind of outmatched the Oilers. So, yeah, I think they deserve a ton of credit. And especially for being able to shut down McDavid and Draisaitl the way they did too.
Julian, do you think this is as much a case of guys just not being able to step up when it mattered? This is now 2 playoff series in a row, right? Like we had 2 really good regular seasons. Last year was excellent, but they just didn't show up prepared against Chicago, and they didn't step up when they needed to. Had a really good regular season this year. Again, potentially you could argue they didn't show up when they needed to. They played well, but not well enough. How much of this is on the Oilers just maybe not being ready to take that next step yet?
I think that a lot of it could land on that. I mean, I'll give credit to the Jets because I think they did a really good job defensively shutting down. I had said that I was worried about them against shutting down Draisaitl and McDavid previously, and they did an excellent job holding them down as best as they could. I think they made things difficult for them getting to the front of the net and getting good scoring opportunities. So that was something that they did really well. But I think a lot of it also has to go with the Oilers. I think they were overall watching that game 3, like that was it just looked like they didn't have the experience. Like it was like their ability to shut down a game was not there. It was completely lacking. I think there was also some, I wouldn't say, I guess you could say mismanagement. I don't want to pin it all on the coaching staff, but I think there were some questionable things that happened where, I mean, you got a rookie playing, Ryan McLeod playing less than 10 minutes a game in the first 2 games. And then, you know, you bump them up, and then there's different guys you take out of the lineup instead of him. And if you weren't going to play him in game 4, why even have him in there? So I think there was a little bit of questionable lineup changes. And I think when you pull guys in and out of the lineup so quickly that there's no momentum, you know, maybe, the guys can't get going. And I also think that Ethan Bear, you know, I don't see how you could run 4 defensemen in triple overtime. I think that one there is just, you know, I mean, I know he's a young player, you know, and makes mistakes, and you got to expect them to make mistakes, but to hold them out of the game for that long and then get forced to play 4D almost the rest of the game is crazy to me, and especially in a playoff series.
Yeah. Okay. Let's circle back to the Ethan Bear conversation, because I know we're going to go on that and talk at great length about that. But Brian, there's a lot of talk today, and when people see this for the past 2 days, about Dave Tippett and what he did. And Julian just brought it up, right? Like there's some question marks. There's always going to be question marks around coach decisions. That's the hindsight of being a fan and the beauty of it. You can look back and go, you know what? I wouldn't have done that. And this is now a couple years in a row now that Dave Tippett has made some questionable decisions, right? Like they separated the Draisaitl, Yamamoto, Nugent, Hopkins lines last year, and everybody's like, well, why are you doing that? And then this year he made some interesting choices. I don't want to say that I know enough to go, what would I have done in that situation? But how much do you lay this on Tippett? And is this about the fact that he just didn't have the horses to do anything, but when you're down, you stick McDavid and Draisaitl together?
Yeah, I'll preface everything too by echoing what you say. I don't know enough either to, you know, what I would do in these situations, but that's a tough question. We talked about this last week, right? When it was, do you want to try what when we were discussing some of the potential line combinations here for the playoffs? And, you know, I think you and I, Jim, are both kind of saying we stick with what's working right now. It just seems that the lines were in a blender from jump in this series, and they never found any consistency. Tippett, you know, I'm hesitant to put a lot of this series on Tippett, because I think that's missing, you know, it's kind of missing the forest for the trees. There's a lot of this falls on the players too, but Tippett came up short in a lot of ways as well. It's not just his line combinations. I think, you know, you can call into question his game management, and I'm sure we'll probably get into the decision about not calling a timeout in game 3, things like that. He's part of it. He's definitely part of it. And I've heard some suggestions that people will say, well, you know, he can learn and grow from this, just as we look to the team too. Well, the team is a bunch of young guys that haven't been really through much of this before. I do expect them to learn and grow with this experience. Tippett has been around for a long time. He's been in a lot of these situations before. If he ain't learned it yet, I don't know if he's gonna.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, you're asking some veteran players to step up in certain situations, which is why we saw James Neal at the end of the season. Maybe he'd get some time, and that didn't last very long. And Tippett's a veteran coach. He should know. And you credit to Tippett. He's been good. And I don't think by any stretch of the imagination that for people who are calling for Dave Tippett to be fired, they are absolutely 100% wrong. I think that's the last thing that you need to be doing to this team right now, especially through all the coaching changes that this team has seen. You do not want to do that. But there's a questionable, and Julian touched on it. We'll start with Colton. The biggest probably questionable decision was, and it's not that it wasn't necessarily deserving, because it goes to show you maybe Ethan Bear wasn't ready to be a top two defenseman in the playoffs, second year defenseman. He coughs up a puck, right in the most important critical time of a game for the absolute, and he doesn't see the ice again, not once, until triple overtime. Not his fault that line change resulted in the goal that eliminated Edmonton. But Colton, how one big of an issue is that Ethan Bear was put in that position to begin with, and he just elevated so quickly up into that top spot. And then two, how would you have done what Tippett did? The minute he coughed that puck up, that was it for him.
Yeah, I think the thing with Bear is he had such a good rookie season, kind of unexpected, really. Nobody really thought. I think there's a lot of people that weren't even expecting him to make the team. And then this year he really did take a step back, and he struggled in the series. Game 3, he was fighting the puck quite a bit, and then obviously that big turnover in Game 4 is the one that's being talked about. And I'm like you, I don't think that firing Tippett's the right call, but I do think that deciding to go to 4 defensemen, especially one in Chris Russell, who hadn't played yet in the series, and like we've said before on here, is pretty limited at what he can do at this point. I think just wasn't the best decision. I think you could see at times that a few of them, I noticed Barry in a couple of the overtimes looked pretty tired. Nurse was the one guy, surprisingly, that seemed like he could have kept playing all night. I don't know how, but I would have preferred they had kept rolling the 3 pairings just to keep guys from being tired. But at the same time, Bear had struggled, so he was in a bit of a tough spot.
Yeah, it was interesting. I remember saying out loud when I was watching Game 4 last night, at the beginning of the game, I thought Del Nerner struggled in the first period. That was the worst hockey I've seen him play in the playoffs. But then as the game got worn on, and I don't know if it was the fact that they played back-to-backs and then he took a little time off and tried to come back in and whatever, because he played like 30 minutes the first game too, that back-to-back. But the longer the game wore on, the more Nurse looked comfortable. And he said it afterwards. He's like, I could have kept going. I know it sounds bad, but I'm good to go. He didn't even seem fazed by it. But Julian, you brought it up, like the Ethan Bear stuff. What do we take from this? I don't imagine that Ethan Bear is a guy the Oilers are going to look to trade or not be part of their future now. But that's a tough one, right? That's a situation where he probably shouldn't have been in that spot to begin with, but he did make a massive, massive mistake. And I like Ethan Bear because when he makes good plays, they're good plays. But when you do stuff like that, you have a tendency to make bad plays too. What do you see for Ethan Bear now?
I just think the playoffs is if you're gonna play him the way you're playing him in the playoffs. I mean, Game 4 of a must-win game isn't the time to make an example out of a player. I think that the timing of what Tippett did may not have been the best. I would just say that. But I mean, you can't excuse what he did, but like I said, you can't go play a triple overtime game where one of your guys, I don't mind riding your big guy, let's say 60 minutes. I have no problems with them doing that. It's just, if you're going to do that, you need your rest. I think the bottom pairing played less than 15 minutes each, Cuckoo and Bear. I mean, if you're going to roll your guys out, maybe give Cuckoo a shift with Bear at least, give them something if you want to roll your big guys out. But to take those 2 guys and out of the game just like that is you're basically shooting yourselves in the foot at that point. And then, I think he was the one going off at the end where there was a change there at the end where they ended up losing, right? You sit him so long and then you throw him back out there and triple overtime. He goes to try and make a change, and then who looks like the bad guy? So I think it's just tough sledding for Ethan Bear right now. I think he's part of the future. I don't think you can look to move him unless you can unload a big contract in the offseason if you give him to Seattle. I think that would be the only thing that I could see is Ethan Bear moving on, is if he's packaged with one of those James Neal or Mikko Koskinen contracts to get him off the books, and then you can go and replace that in free agency. Other than that, I think that there's no question that he'll be back next year and in a prominent role.
Yeah, I certainly hope they don't abandon him. It's not, I don't know how to describe it. It sucks. It's just a really, and to his defense, he was not the only guy to get benched, right? Like you mentioned it, Slater Cuckoo, there was at least 3 or 4 forwards that barely saw the ice at all. And for a while, Puljujarvi, Gaetan Haas, those guys didn't see it either, right? So he was rolling 2 forward lines for a good, period and a half of overtime, right?
It's close to half a team for the rest of the game.
Yeah, like it's just, and you're right. When you say the big guy plays the minutes, I mean, Chris Pronger did it and stuff like that. So when you got the horse, you play the horse, right? I absolutely understand that. I would hope they don't bail on him in that way. Brian, I want to start with you, switching gears just a little bit. What did you make of everybody's talking about it today? Mostly people from the East, most of the people who don't watch this team very regularly, most of the people who love to just troll the fact that the Oilers are out of this thing now. But what did you make of Connor McDavid's reactions through this whole thing? So he was very emotional, more emotional than we normally see from McDavid. He's not the kind of guy to, where when he scores, he gets excited. But outside of that, you don't see him be too demonstrative on the bench. He's not yelling. He's not screaming. But he kind of was in the other game. Game 4, gave Puljujarvi a piece of his mind for passing it into his feet, just sort of shaking his head at the bear pass. Is that concerning? Is that just passion? What do you make of Connor McDavid's reactions and what people are reacting to that now?
Personally, I loved it. I wrote after game 3 that I thought this team, one of the things that I thought this team was really missing that was separating it from getting to the next level is a particular style of leadership. Like we've seen them get these deer in the headlight moments. We saw it, in game 5 against Anaheim when they blew the 3-goal lead late. We saw it in the tough moments against Chicago last year. We saw it in this series, and it really was quite obvious in that when they gave up the 3 goals in 3 minutes that tied the game. You look at the leadership group on this team, and there really isn't, I think I phrased it as there isn't like the bad cop amongst the good cops, right? There isn't that demonstrative guy that you can just see giving that fiery speech in the locker room that kind of amps everybody up. McDavid, I likened him to kind of like Gretzky. They're both pretty mild-mannered. But if you look at the Oilers leadership crew back in that day, they had guys like Kevin Lowe who could kick butt, or Mark Messier, who was just like, he could inspire you just by the personality of him. So I was saying, if the Oilers are going to step up to this next level, they have to have somebody on this team. And if they don't have it, they got to go out and get it that kind of fills that leadership role and can help get them through these tough times. And so to see McDavid finally get to the point where he's like, you know what, enough of this. I'm tired of losing. And I think that's what pushed him to the edge. And he's kind of acknowledged it. I'm not sure if you guys have seen any of his post-game comments last night or today, but he kind of, without directly saying so, kind of acknowledged that, this is what it takes to get to this point. And this is who he's ready to become and who's the kind of mentality he's going to assume. I think that was a big pivotal moment for the Oilers last night, just to see him grow before our eyes like that. So I don't look at it as a negative at all. It's a positive to me.
Yeah. And I was going to say, Colton, I mean, you can maybe tell me what you think here. The fact that he was so vocal and then has said, afterwards, he's like, look, I'm really proud of this group. We're in it together. He's really close with Darnell Nurse. He's really close with Leon Draisaitl. To Brian's point, I think that is the leadership group of this team. Like, I think those 3 guys are the guys that they are going to build this squad around. I was also going to ask you what you think of that. And 2, is it fair for people to be saying things like, oh, Connor McDavid's going to want out? Because not to blame Connor McDavid, but he was responsible in a major way for 2 of the very key goals against where Edmonton collapsed. In game 3, he tried to bring it around the boards and did a very lousy job doing that. And then in the triple overtime, he did somewhat of a lazy, and he's probably super gassed and tired, but sort of a lazy dump in, which led to that triple overtime goal. So he's got to probably look at himself too and go, right, like I can be mad at everybody else, but I got to be mad at me too. Like I could have been better there. Is that wrong or is that right?
No, that's completely right. And that was kind of the one thing I was thinking when you did see him last night showing a lot of emotion, was like he wasn't great at all this series. So I think as far as people saying he wants out, I think that's just become the easy take. That's sort of since the moment he was picked at there, had the lottery balls go there, and everyone said he looked upset. I think that's always just going to be a narrative that sticks around. Yeah, as far as like the emotion on the ice, or on the bench, I have no problem with it. The one thing I did kind of question was when you had mentioned the Puljujarvi pass into the skates. On the ice, you could kind of see almost kind of like what we see from the Draisaitl, like the hands kind of went up. I don't love that, but on the bench, just yelling and being passionate and fiery and everything, I have zero problem with that. So yeah, and then his comments today, I think just really reassured that he does want to stick it out in Edmonton, and I don't think there's anything to worry about.
You in the same boat there, Julian? You think there's any any remote concern that he does anything other than just dig in here and do what's needed at Edmonton to help this team turn the next page?
No, I don't think there's a question. He'll be back and doesn't want to go anywhere. That's just the media talking and making some noise. But from listening to the post game today, one of the things that stood out to me the most was just that, you know, he kind of, when he was talking about the management, he said, you know, we have some big decisions to make in the offseason. They said, well, not me. Management has to do those kind of things. So he kind of alluded to, I think he's indirectly telling the management, you know, things got to be changed. Things got to happen here. And, you know, verbally, in a respectful way, you know, telling guys to, you know, do something to kind of help me out or help the team out here because we don't have the pieces to do what we need to do. So that was one thing that stuck out to me the most in terms of, you know, the passion and stuff on the bench. I think, you know, that's just hockey too. You know, you're going to get upset with your teammates. Not everything's all, you know, daisies and sunshine and rainbows. So, you know, if he's going to get mad, he's going to get mad. And that's just the passion inside of him wanting to be good and lead the team. Right. So, in terms of that, I mean, I don't mind that. It's just pure frustration. I think that he's frustrated with how things have gone the last couple of seasons. And I think they're still an inexperienced team. And this is all part of the process too. And I think Holland knows that, being such a veteran general manager. And that's maybe why he didn't go out and get so many bigger pieces. And it was just kind of minor moves and let's see where this group can take us. And then with the cap space this year, I think that's a big building block that he can use to see what needs to be addressed now. And I think that veteran leadership is something that we were talking about just now. And I think that's one of the big areas that needs to be addressed. And you've seen it around the league. People are adding veteran pieces. The Leafs are one of the big ones, you know, Spezza, Thornton, guys like that. And teams have been doing that, like even Jeff Carter in Pittsburgh, you know, guys are big character guys in the room. And I think that'll help bring those younger guys along and that'll go a longer way to, and like I said, this is all part of the process and, you know, losing is part of it. And when that puck drops and you end up losing game 4, you know, leaves a sour taste in your mouth. And the Jets have been down that road before, right? They've had their share of heartaches and they didn't look phased when they were down in games or anything. They were trusting the process. And I think the Oilers struggled with that. And that's what led to their demise.
Yeah. I'll add 2 points to this. One, can you imagine the conversation we'd be having if Connor McDavid acted like he didn't care? You know, like if he wasn't passionate, if he was just sitting there aloof and not really like, oh, whatever. Like it came out and didn't seem to be too bothered with losing after 2 playoff series where they get bounced early. I can't even imagine the reactions and the conversations that we would have. Second, if there's even a remote possibility, and I personally don't think that there is, that Connor McDavid is even got an ink in his head that he's just like, I don't know if this is the right fit for me. It's a very easy conversation for Ken Holland to sit down with Connor McDavid and go, look, hey, I get it. It's frustrating. We all think this sucks. This is not what we wanted. It's not what we thought would happen. But you and Leon and Darnell are not abnormal in that you look at all these stars. There's very few of these huge players that have won Stanley Cups recently that were able to get into the playoffs and win a Stanley Cup in their first 5-6 seasons, right? Like this is a learning process. You don't just walk into the NHL and win. So I think if you just tell McDavid, look, this is the offseason, and probably why he said what he said, right? In that he's aware of the fact that there's money, that people's contracts are ending, the buyouts are coming off the books. He knows it. And I'm sure they've had some conversations about that stuff, or he's just aware of how it works. And so I don't think you got to say too much to McDavid to go, hey, but I do think, and we'll talk about this probably a lot more next week, that he's going to be very closely watching, just go, okay, well, what are we doing now? Right? Like this is 2 seasons in a row. This didn't go the way we wanted to. We all know something's got to change. Holland's now got the reins to this thing. He's going to have a lot to do. So Brian, let's go there next. If without getting into too much detail, is there anybody in this series, any players, anything like that you said, okay, this player is probably not going to be back next year? For me, and I was a little surprised by this, I think Dmitry Kulikov is probably not going to be back. I thought that was a nice little pickup at the trade deadline. I thought he was pretty good at the end of the season. And you could clearly tell that Dave Tippett was like, I don't think this is the guy. And he was on a 1-year kind of closing out. I don't think he'll be back. I think they'll look for something else. Is there anybody else in this series that stood out for you if Ken Holland's going, okay, what are we doing now? It's probably not the guy we're going to call on.
Yeah, Kulikov for sure. I'm with you on that, Jim. I thought that was a good pickup. What was he here for? Maybe 10, 12 games at the end of the season, so barely had a chance to get himself familiar with Tippett and the team anyway. And then he's benched by game 4 or scratched by game 4. So obviously you didn't win him over. He's a free agent. I think that's a brief cameo appearance that he's going to go on to another team next year. I'll add another name in there. I think James Neal. I really thought that they were going to lean more heavily on him in the playoffs because it seemed they were gearing up for it when, he went for not playing for barely a month to playing just about every game down the stretch. It looked like they were trying to get him geared up for a big time role during the playoffs because he did have that experience and he has a good track record in the playoffs. Even last year, he scored a couple goals. So, and towards the end of this series again, he was just, he was not being utilized either. So obviously there's the contract with that, but I think when you couple the fact that, Neal is clearly just not in Tippett's plans and what getting rid of him could mean salary wise, I'm sure we've seen the last of James Neal.
Yeah, it might be easier said than done, but I'm sure they'll take a look at it.
No, I'm sure they'll figure out a way to do it. I really do. I just can't see. Yeah.
Even if it's a small short-term pain for long-term gain kind of thing, little money on the books is better than having them around. Colton, is there anybody in this series that stood out for you as somebody that probably is not in their future plans?
Yeah, I think Alex Chason just kind of in and out of the lineup and then didn't play very much at all yesterday. Obviously they have some guys at the end of the year whose contracts are up that we've talked about. I don't think Chason's really one, but I think that's for a reason. I can't see them re-signing him. So he'd be one that I would expect to see somewhere else next year.
And what about you, Julian? Anybody stood out for you? Oh, you're on mute.
Oh, there we go. Sorry. Yeah. So I think Cahoon is one that stuck out to me just because, he didn't really show much. I mean, you couldn't really have expected much, especially making his debut, especially in a big situation. I don't know if I would say he's not going to be back per se because he might be back in a more limited role. I think they gave him a shot in top 6 and it may not have worked out the way they wanted. So I don't mind them bringing him back and if they're going to play him in the bottom 6. But I think to go off the board here, one of the guys I think would be Ryan Nugent Hopkins. I think there's a lot of whirlwind around what he's going to do. And I think it's all because of the way Tippett's used him. I'm surprised that he didn't get put back up on that top line with McDavid throughout the series and just kind of go figuring how the depth of the teams would match up that way if Draisaitl would be your second line center. And just because, you weren't getting much from Nugent Hopkins really, especially what we're used to seeing out of him, right? So I think that one is a big question mark going into the offseason. And if they're not going to use him if they're going to use him in a second line role, that's a big payment for depending on what he's going to want. It looks like if he's anywhere near what he's at now for a second line center, I mean, it could get a little bit steep considering you have a guy you're already paying that much who could fill that role in Draisaitl. So I don't know. I think that's the biggest one for me would be Ryan Nugent Hopkins, just to see where he ends up and what happens to him.
It will be interesting because if they choose to move on, they need 2 top 6 left wingers.
Yes.
Which that's not the easiest thing to find in free agents. Finding one that is going to be good for 4 or 5 years is enough. Try to find 2. That's going to be very interesting.
Yeah, it's just interesting to see because if that's what they think of him, why wasn't he there in that spot? I get they want to load the top line up when maybe hit the panic button a bit and just overmatch them on skill on the top line. But like I said, the depth was a big thing too, I think. And if he wasn't going, if they want him to play the left wing, he should have been on that line with McDavid at least, one time in at least one game in this series.
Yeah, they definitely could have tried it out. Brian, was there anybody that stood out for you? Anybody we don't have a lot of positives to take away from this series, but if we could try to find one, is there a player here that you kind of said, I was really pleasantly surprised by the way that he showed up and played and there's something here?
Ryan McLeod, maybe quietly. I know he didn't get to play much. I thought for someone that didn't get to play consistently, he would have to do with what he could with limited minutes. And this was his first playoff too. I thought he kind of handled himself well. I know that's not for someone who was playing 8-9 minutes a night, that's not a huge revelation you can make out of that. But I thought he equated himself pretty well here in his first playoff. But yeah, I mean, up and down the lineup beyond that, there's really nobody that you could say really wowed you in this series, unfortunately. And that's probably a large part of why we're having the conversation that we're having today and not talking about Game 5 or the next round.
Yeah. I mean, I'm trying to find silver linings here. Colton, what about you? Is there anybody that you're like, you know what, that was okay? Like maybe didn't disappoint, maybe played better than you thought, or at least if this was an audition for next year, because there's going to be some major changes this summer, has solidified himself on this team?
Well, again, like it's tough given his age, and we've harped on it a lot, but I think Mike Smith last year in the playoffs, obviously he didn't play for very long in it, but struggled. And I thought I don't think there's much of a doubt that he was their best player throughout the 4 games. Julian had said earlier, like in the overtimes last night, he was spectacular. So I think he was one guy that I was kind of waiting to see what would happen. So I was really happy with the way he played.
Is he your guy too, as Julian? Is it Mike Smith? Is it Ryan McLeod, or do you have somebody else?
I like both of those picks. I think Mike Smith, he would be one of the bigger positives out of the series, but I just don't think that going forward he's much a part of the plans. Like we talked about previously, just about the way the goaltending situation is going to shake out. But I think for me, I like the play of Yamamoto at times. I think he could be a guy that I think they need to use him more in a consistent top 6 role. I know he was bounced around up and down the lineup, and I think that's part of the inconsistency that we saw in their play was just everybody was getting shuffled around so often that there was constant wavering of offense and different chemistries and different lines and how people like different things. There was no cohesion on a line really. So I think you saw that a lot. And what they want to do with Yamamoto though is, in the triple overtime, you saw him playing with that top line after Puljujarvi had those little blips in his play. But I think that if he can be a skill player and maybe they see him as a replacement for Nugent Hopkins on that top line with McDavid, I mean, they're almost a similar player besides the versatility that Nugent Hopkins gives you, playing the opposite side as well. But I think that he could be a guy that in the future, if it's a cheaper replacement, that could emerge as a running mate for McDavid in the future.
Yeah, for me, I'm going to go a couple names in 2 very different situations. One, I think Gaetan Haas in limited minutes really showed well. I think you could tell that Dave Tippett sort of liked his game and started to use him in some situations where you're like, interesting, that Gaetan Haas, and he did okay. Like, he wasn't fantastic. He didn't give you a lot of offense, but he was working hard. He was getting chances on net. He was playing in situations you wouldn't have expected. I thought that was a good showing for him. And I do think they're going to look at that and go, I think this is the player that we want to have at the very least in our bottom 6, but could potentially pop himself into that top 6. The other player who I think impressed, but I think the impression that he gave is going to send him out of Edmonton, was Tyson Barrie. I think we knew he was good based on his offensive numbers coming into the season, but when he was playing as much as he played in that Game 4, and for all the crap that he takes about how bad he can be defensively, and he didn't allow, was a real contributor to not allowing a goal in almost three periods of hockey. I think that did a lot for him. And I think in his comments today, when he talked to the media and said, look, I'm looking for a long-term deal. We'll see if the Oilers are interested, but we're also going to see what other teams. I think that's basically the writing on the wall that he probably won't be back. So it was interesting that you get both of those, right? You get a little bit of Tyson Barrie, who played pretty well in some situations, didn't always play perfect, but he played pretty well, and just probably enough to send him off to another team, because another team's going to take a look at him and go, you know what, there's a guy that we could probably invest some money in. So it'll be interesting. But I do think Gaetan Haas showed pretty well. I think next week what we should probably do, if you guys are cool with it, and I'm just throwing this at you, so you're going to have to say yes anyway, is we should probably take a look more detail about what Ken Holland might be thinking. So just really look into some of the plays, your priority list, what you would do in his situation, what you might make a focus, whether it's positionally or who you bring back, things like that. Take a deeper dive into that, because we brought up some very interesting points between, Mike Smith might be back, but maybe not as a starter. So who's your starter? Things like that. Maybe take a closer look. You guys cool if we do that?
Yep. That's the plan.
Awesome. Okay. Well, that's going to do it for this week then. Yeah, homework, right? You can prepare. We're not surprising anybody with anything. That's gonna do it for us. I appreciate it, you guys. This is Oilers Overtime. Julian, Brian, Colton, thank you very much. It's a little depressing that we're done talking about the active on ice product for this season, but I still believe that there's a big future here. I don't think this Oilers team is in any real trouble of being a team that we have to worry about. I think they're just scraping the surface of what they could become, and I am very interested to see what Ken Holland will do. For everybody else, thank you. Hit that like and subscribe button on YouTube. If you're watching this on Facebook, hit the like button. If you're listening to this on the podcast, leave us a rating. We'd appreciate it. And we will talk to you guys next week. Thank you very much from the Hawk Raiders.